Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Just wait a few more minutes for people to connect. Just 2 minutes, no more. Thank you to be on time. Morning, good afternoon, welcome. 1 more minute. Already more than 50%. Okay, I think we can start. Then good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Then it's the second webinar of this series. It's called New EU Organic Regulation Changes in Details. Then this time we will go more deeply into the changes in the regulation and also with more practical insights. I have presented last time everything about co-lead and some elements. Today, I think most of you were already there last time, then I'm not going to go back to all details about co-lead, but we invite you to go to visit our website, and it's co-lead.link. But this webinar then is organized as part of our FFM Plus program. It's founded by the EU and the OACPS. Maybe only in three words. Florentine, can you go a bit further? Okay. About co-lead, the next one. Then co-lead just in three words. Then it's we are a non-for-profit association. We are an organization implementing and development projects all around capacity building and agriculture. And we are also, then everything that we do, it's around capacity building. And also our website can be considered as a toolbox, and you will find a lot of information there, and everything is free of access. Then please go, I will put the link like this, you will have it in the chat. Then during this session, if you have any question, please use the box Q&A. You can put all comments you want in the chat, but for the question, it's easier if you write them in the Q&A box. Well, maybe can you go a bit further for our programs? Then,
yes.
Yeah, you can go quicker. Yeah, you can go through them. Then the last, I wanted to say just a word about Agrinfo again, because you see that all the changes in the EU legislation is quite complex to understand. And it's quite often that you have changes, not only for the organic regulation, but also for other matters like maximum residual limits, pesticides, a lot of different things. And the work of the within the program Agrinfo is really to do the monitoring, to see what is changing, and to make it simple to understand. Simple for non-EU countries to understand, and after you can take action based on those information. Then it's if you are not yet registered, if you have not already registered to be receive the newsletter from co-lead Agrinfo, please go on our website agrinfo.eu. Now I let the floor to Florentine to start and to speak about the topic of today. And don't hesitate to ask your question in the chat box. At the end, if we have some time, we can also start discussing, and I will open the mic to people who wants to speak. Thank you very much. Florentine, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Marie-Hélène, and welcome to all of you. I'd like to introduce you also to Brian Sibunia, who has been joining me, or we've been doing trainings on the EU regulations specifically for smallholder groups for the last 3 years on behalf of co-lead training program, and it will be very nice to do this webinar together again. Brian will ask me all your nitty-gritty questions that may come up, and we'll do a short break after each section, so don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat when you have them, and Brian will facilitate that so that we have a bit of exchange and back and forward, because today really the aim is that the key aspects that are tricky to understand, we all gain some bit more profound understanding, although you'll see there are open questions, but I'll do my best. So today, I hope most of you have been at last week's webinar where we presented the changes or the overall new regulation, gave the bigger overview. Today, we'll be diving deeper into only a couple of selected topics, most of all the adaptations, the group of operator rules and what it actually means in practice, because these are the most complex and material changes for almost all supply chains in Africa. So that's why we're going deeper there, but we'll also look deeper again at a couple of the new production rules, selected ones based on the questions you raised last time and what I figured from the list of participants, a few aspects around control system, and I'll end with a short summary of findings from 2 different impact studies to give you a bit more the bird's eye view, how all this affects organic production on a global scale, which may also help you to feel not alone with the challenges you face, because it's basically challenges hundreds of supply chains face at the moment. And yeah, maybe that's helpful for you to know as well. And I'd like to point out that we're not doing any official information on behalf of the European Commission, or that it's sort of official guidance or interpretation. So, new groups of operator rules. I mentioned already last time there is a completely new definition, a new concept of a group of operators. And while it sounds not too complicated at first, this definition of the EU has far-reaching implications. Just to recap again, a group of operators shall be composed of members who are farmers committed to organic production, so they must be farmers, and they should be organic or in conversion, basically. And they must be under a maximum size or turnover limit, which we'll explore in more detail. They must be under 2,000 members maximum, have legal personality, operate an internal control system, have a system of joint marketing, and the members shall be in geographic proximity and register only for one group of operators for a given product. So let's look at the most difficult rules around this. Just to point this out, this definition has been very controversial and hard to understand, and there have been clarifications by the EU Commission in a separate document called the Frequently Asked Question on Organic Rules, which specify, for example, more clearly than anybody had realized before, that non-organic farmers cannot be members. I'm just pointing this out because some of these frequently asked questions are not yet as well known as the original text, and they have to be read together with the original text. So let's look at the new maximum member farm size or organic turnover limit. So in a simplified way, the farmer has to be either smaller than 5 hectares, or if not, the organic turnover shall be up to 25,000 euro per year. So there's 2 criteria, and they are OR criteria. What does this mean in practice? So many members in organic producer groups are smaller than 5 hectare total farm area or total farm holding. This is the majority of farms and groups. And the 5 hectare refer to total agricultural area, total agricultural land operated by the farmer, not only the certified crop. So it also includes other crops grown by the farmer. But even so, the majority of farms and groups are below 5 hectares. They're really small farmers. So if any of your farmers has less or up to 5 hectare total farm area, they're eligible to be member in a group of operator, no need to check anything else. So that's the easiest one. If all your farmers are under 5 hectares, you can tick this box very quickly. Yeah? It's very easy. But then there is also, and I'd like to clarify that the 5 hectare really is not crop specific. So it doesn't matter how big the crop area is, it's the total farm area for the 5 hectare. But the second criteria, the turnover, that one is proportionate to the organic, to the area under the organic crop. So it's really good that there are 2 criteria. So if a farm has more than 5 hectares, which is very common in many countries and many crops that I've seen, more common actually than I expected initially, these farms can still be members in a group of operator if their organic turnover, and this means the organic sales to the group, is less than 25,000 euro a year. And this, from all we've seen in trainings in Africa, for example, is very, very likely in most crops, even if the farms are up to 20 hectares, or even sometimes a farm with 40 hectares could be under the 25,000 organic turnover limit and still be eligible to be member in a group of operator. So the good news is that really less farmers are affected by the restrictions than many people originally thought. And please be sure to check the turnover and don't exclude simply all farmers that are bigger than 5 hectares. I've seen this mistake happening, and of course it has disastrous effects on the group's economy. Yeah, really problematic if all these slightly larger farmers are excluded. The easiest check you can do with regard to the turnover is if you use your farmers list, your organic farmers list in an already certified group, you will have a yield estimate for each farmer, which is so you could enter an additional column in which you multiply the yield estimate with the current farm gate price or the average farm gate price of the last season. To give you the potential organic turnover of that farmer. And in most cases, you'll see very, very quickly that it's far below the 25,000, but this can help you justify this towards your CB. As we'll see in the examples, it's important to note that the potential turnover isn't necessarily the real organic turnover, as the processor may not buy the entire production, or the farmer may not be willing to sell the entire production to the organic group. So if you come close to the 25,000, essentially, I'd recommend to look closer into real sales records, basically. And just as a side remark, these size rules are also reflected in the new ICS requirement. So it's the role of the ICS manager of a group to verify the eligibility of members as defined in the documented ICS procedures. So in your ICS manual, you will have a section where you define yourself how you check that all your farm members meet the eligibility, these farm size criteria. And then it's the ICS manager who's responsible to approve that the members meet these criteria. And this is then verified. Your own internal procedures are then verified by the control body. So I'll do some examples to explain the rule a bit clearer. So for example, we have pineapple project in Africa. 45 members are under 5 hectares. So that's an easy one. You don't have to look any further. They're okay because they're under 5 hectare total area. No problem, no need to look any further. But hey, we have one member who is really big in the same group. And this member, as an example, has 40 hectare total farm area and 9 hectares under pineapple. So as it's bigger than 4 hectares, we have to check the organic turnover, clear. And with a production, in this case, of 420,000 kilos of pineapple, the sales value would be only 5,000 euro. So although this is a 40-hectare farm with 9 hectares under pineapple, this farmer is very clearly under the organic turnover limit with no risk of reaching it in any sort of, unless the prices would go up by factor 5, right? So it's very safely away from the limit and certainly okay. Let's look at another example. Again, coconut groups. A lot of groups have many small farmers, but then a couple of bigger ones. So of course, you can start looking for the bigger farms, not only in total farm area, but area under the organic crop. And in this other example, for example, we have a farm with 18 hectares under coconut. Total farmland, total farm area is unknown, which is also common because many groups have in the past not registered all fields operated by their farmers, just the organic crop field that they were interested to buy. But as you can see, if they have 18 hectares under coconut, they are clearly above the 5 hectare limit. So we anyway need to check the organic turnover. And with that example's yield of 6,000 kilo per hectare and the price at that time, which I think was 1 or 2 years ago, the potential turnover of this farmer would be 41,000 euros. So alert, this farmer does seem to be too big to be a member in a group of operator. However, we also know that year after year, the processor buys only 40% of production from all farms because of capacity and sales reasons. And in this case, the sales record confirm for 2004, and you can justify it, that the actual sales of the farmer have only been 16,000 euros. So the 16,000 are again under the 25,000. So this farmer would be okay. But of course, in such cases, the ICS would need to be really, really careful what they do. And I guess in reality, the control body may also throw up a fuss about it. But it does meet the regulation because the organic turnover is low and also has been below the 25,000 for a longer period of time. Let's look at cocoa. Cocoa is interesting because historically, cocoa prices, no cocoa, when we started with looking at implications on cocoa 1.5 years ago, no cocoa farmer worldwide was at any risk of exceeding the 25,000 euro organic turnover. But now with the higher cocoa prices, this is, for example, slightly different in Latin America, where we found cases in the Dominican Republic and Ecuador that farmers had actually exceeded the turnover limit. But I've collected some examples for Africa. Of course, again, any farm that is smaller than 5 hectares is okay without any checking. But with the current price and an average yield of 400 kilo per hectare, which is rather high for Togo, but still a value many use, it would mean that any farm with less than 9 hectares under cocoa would not exceed the 25,000 euros, the sales limit. So in reality, most cocoa farmers are very likely to have less in Togo, and other West African countries are very likely to have under 9 hectares of cocoa, and hence they'd be eligible. But again, I've listed an example of a really large cocoa farmer, 25 hectare total farm area, 10 hectare organic cocoa. Yes, this farmer would be, with a turnover of 27,000 euro, would be too big to be certified under a group of operator. But you could, in any one given year, check the sales, check the actual sales of that farmer to verify eligibility. And of course, I mean, here, considerations on fluctuating prices versus long-term average incomes may be helpful in your analysis and justification with with the control body on your eligibility system, that in a way, the rules, the size rules are there to restrict group certification to small farmers, and this is meaningful and important. So if farmers are consistently too big over the years, there are some cases that really farms are simply always too big. And of course, in this case, they need to be individually certified and cannot be members in a group of operators. So what if group members are really too big? So they have more than 5 hectares and they have the turnover of more than 25,000, then they cannot be members in a group of operators. And to sell as organic, this too big farm would need to be certified as an individual farm by a certification body. Another option that is being practiced in Asia and Latin America is that the farm splits to be under 5 hectare total farm area, which means that then the group would have more operators. What is also a problem is that this too large farm cannot remain member of a producer organization, for example, of a cooperative that wants to be certified as group of operators. So either the cooperative forms a new entity for just the small eligible farmers, or the large farms are excluded from membership from that cooperative. And this is causing a lot of practical problems. But as I said, I don't think it will really affect organic production in Africa because of the unfortunately very low organic turnover values of farmers. So this is more of a challenge in Latin America, where, for example, a lot of banana production is actually above the limit. As soon as a farm is more than 5 hectares, they'll be too large. And that affects then many thousands of organic producers. So for that reason, I've included one example of a banana association in Latin America. It has 200 members. All members are organic, so they don't have that problem. But 50%, or half of them, have more than 5 hectares of farmland, total farm area. And all farms in that country, farms with more than 3 hectares on the banana automatically have an organic turnover that exceeds the limit. So it's very clear that they are too big. So what is this association doing? So some of the small scale members will split their farm operation by renting part of the land to family members. So this means they'll have more new members in the association. A few neighboring farms will associate into a bigger farm enterprise, into a new legal entity that is then certified as a larger operator farm. And 5 large members will apply for individual certification, and the farmer association will pay for half their certification costs and continue to support the farm in production, documentation, advisory services, and so on. And these single farms and the associations then make commercial agreements on cost sharing, sales, monopoly of sales, and so on. So a lot of new things to set up, but they found a solution. But it's yet a bit unclear what they do about membership of these larger farms in the association. Another term that's been really debated a lot is about what does it mean, the legal personality that a group of operators can have. Is there a restriction what type of legal personality it is? And there has been an answer by the European Commission on this particular topic. So the answer was legal personality is not defined in the organic regulation, but refers to entities recognized by national law as having distinct identity as well as legal rights and duties. So they can own property, enter into contracts according to the laws of the regulation. And another answer, they also specify that the organic regulation does not prevent a group of operators from participating in the membership of other type of farm associations or arrangements such as a cooperative if all other conditions are met. So basically, you must be a legal entity recognized by national law as having rights and obligations. This does not necessarily mean registration. For example, a natural person can also have the right to recognized rights and obligation. But in most cases, for a kind of farmer group, there is some form of registration required, but it's not an EU requirement, basically, that it has to be documented. And the group of operator legal entity may be member in another organization or may have other contractual obligations towards other legal entities. This is neither required nor restricted. And this clarification is important for finding solutions because we have hundreds of groups now who have to set up new legal entity. So of course it's important what are the requirements there. So can it be any legal personality? Yes, but in addition to the guidance, I do please check with your CB because I've seen this is a lot of discussion back and forth what different CBs accept, and it depends on the legal situation in the country. And almost all cases I know, they had to get a lawyer to sort of give them advice on the legal entity. So it's a bit complicated in reality. But in principle, a group of operator can be any form of legal entity, legal personality recognized by national law as having rights and obligations and a distinct identity. But I also like to point out the entity should be composed of members who are farmers. So it needs to be some form of legal entity that allows to have members. And the legal form should permit to exclude members easily. For example, if they are sanctioned or they become too big, or they are no longer interested in organic certification, it must be easy to remove them from membership, which is not always the case in a classic farmer cooperative, for example, because they're shareholders of the cooperative and so on. So this is a new challenge that organic certification is a requirement for legal membership. This makes the legal form a bit more complicated, and just to keep this in mind when you set up new entities. And as I said, the legal entity could have close contractual and cooperative relationships. For example, the exporter can set up some form of organization with the farmers and have very close contractual agreements between that group entity and the company. Of course, the farmers need to be willing for that. Or a cooperative could set up an association of organic cooperative members and link this new entity by constitution very close to the mother cooperative. So this is not restricted, but there needs to be two different or a distinct legal identity for the group of operators, which meets all these requirements of Article 36(1). So some examples and tips of legal entities that we have seen now in different countries. So the most obvious one is a farmer organization like an agricultural cooperative or other form of legally recognized farmers association, but it could also be any other type of civil service society or association, a foundation, an NGO. In some countries, there are entities that are called self-help groups, community enterprises, guarantee companies. We've seen sort of really different types of legal entities in different countries, which are composed of organic farmers as the members. So when you set up the entities, you need to take great care that in the constitution and everywhere it's clear that the organic farmers are members in that entity. According to our understanding, it could also be farmers' companies or a limited company with the registered business purpose of joint marketing of the product from organic farmers. But the organic farmers have to be obviously shareholders and somehow members of that company. No CB will accept a privately owned limited owned only by the processor to then be composed of farmers. That doesn't work, right? But it doesn't say that a limited company can't be composed of farmers, but it's up for you to meet that criteria. And the selection of the legal form tends to be really complicated because there are tax implications of the transactions. There is a question of liability. Not all legal forms are possible to do across different regions of a country. farmers' interests and motivations are a bit difficult. Sometimes the farmers are really eager to organize, sometimes they're not. So that needs to be considered. And often, especially in Africa, it was found that, for example, processors, they already have existing legal entities in the supply chain, like farmers associations in one section or one region, for example, that they were working with, which so far had no active role in the certification process. But of course, these are existing legal entities that then can be used when you design your future system, and could be potentially become certified as group of operators with some minor adaptation. And from all I've seen, unfortunately, there may be a need for legal advice in the process if it gets more complicated. And just as a practical aspect, commercial agreements are extremely important. So there will be much more now regulated in commercial agreements between these different units, which is not what, for example, processors are used to, because in the past the processors owned the certificate. Now they won't own the certificate of the group, and they need to agree on everything in separate commercial agreements on what are the duties, who pays what, how does it, sales obligations and so on. It's important that the group of operator can subcontract the ICS and the traceability system to the mother company or to the mother organization. And if we found in many cases now that having several small group entities can have risk management benefits and may even be preferred by farmers. So instead of one group with 2,000 farmers, maybe it does make more sense to have 3 groups with between 600 and 700 farmers each, because if one of the groups gets decertified, you still have the other groups that are still certified. And also for farmers' cohesion and other reasons, it may actually be easier and better overall to have several units instead of one. But if the groups get too small, it becomes really expensive. One question that is also a practical question in many cases is, can a group be certified by different CBs, and can a farmer be member in different groups? So any operator or group of operator may only be certified by one CB for the same product category. And category means, for example, unprocessed plant product, so not just one. So a group of operator cannot be certified for pineapple by one CB and for mango by another CB. Only one CB is allowed for one product category. But a farmer can be member in different group of operators if it's for different products. So a farmer, a coconut farmer cannot be in 2 coconut group of operators, but it could be in one group for organic coffee and in another group of operator for organic mango, for example. So that is permitted by the regulation, at least. I'm not recommending it. It makes a total mess for the ICS, and the ICS has to be able to show that it's up for dealing with this. I'm just pointing out what the regulation would allow if all other conditions are met, basically. There was also a lot of discussion whether preparation and specifically processing is permitted in a group of operators, because the regulatory text doesn't really say so very clearly. The preparation done by the group after collecting the products by members. And the Commission's answer clarified that yes, a group of operators can perform any activity, including preparation, under the group certification. So it's no problem if a cooperative of organic cocoa farmers collects the cocoa pods and then does the processing centrally, for example. That's not a problem for being certified as a group of operators. But they can only prepare and market products from its statutory members, who hence have to be organic or in conversion members. I'll go now through some examples for adaptations, but maybe first, Brian, do do we have already questions for this very enjoyable and not complex at all first part?
Yes, we have two questions. The first one from Betty Njeri. She's saying, in case of a registered cooperative with legal personality as per local laws, is made up of organic and non-organic members. And part of the members who are doing organic are in contract with an exporter who has been managing the ICS and giving technical advice. Does this setting still qualify as group of operators in the new regulation?
No, it does not, because we have two legal entities, right? The processor at the moment, that's not composed of farmers, so it doesn't qualify for group of operators certification. And the cooperative is the other legal entity that's on offer. But that entity is composed legally of organic and non-organic farmers. So that doesn't qualify as being certified as group of operators. So a new legal entity for just the organic farmers will be needed. And actually, this is the case for all processor and trader-led producer groups worldwide. This means almost half of organic, or more than a third of organic production in groups now needs to reorganize to meet the new regulation by setting up, in most cases, new farmers association or other forms of farmers groups that can be certified as group of operators.
The next question from Traore. Do you think there is a high risk of not identifying that a farmer is a member of several groups if several private companies support the same farmers to transition to the new EU regulation?
There is definitely a risk of identity, but I'd be even more concerned of the, say, organic integrity risk. I mean, several groups really doesn't work. I mean, at the most, as I've shown you, it could be two groups for two different products. I think is still maybe just about realistic if both ICAs are excellent, there is super communication, and there is excellent documentation on farm level. In all real life situations that I've seen of groups, I would not consider even membership in two groups to be robust enough for certification under strict requirements. But I don't know, maybe you have different experiences, Brian, but I think it's close to impossible. But it's good the regulation leaves that leeway, because sometimes it's totally different products with totally different buyers, and indeed it can be managed. So it's good that we have that flexibility from the regulation, but in practice, I anyway have my doubts it can work.
Yeah, it's practically, I mean, difficult. And actually, the following question relates to that. That is there a system in place that can tell if a farmer is registered in two groups trading in the same crop?
The new regulation requires the farmer to sign in the contract, in the ICS contract. So for each farmer, the ICS has to have a contract in place in which the farmer states explicitly that they are not member in another farm. Now the question is, if the farmer has signed they are not member in another farm, but you still want to check, in future there is at least the theoretical option that the farmers list will become, I don't know how, part of the organic certificate for each group of operators. So theoretically, as far as I know, the group of operators will be, the member list will become public. So if you have you probably know whether there is other companies operating in the same area. So it would be possible to check the members lists, but I'm not entirely sure whether the members list is compulsory or optional. I think it's optional in the organic certificate. But in any case, I think with the clearer, there is now the requirement at least that the ICS could and should also check explicitly with the farmer again and again. It's a clear requirement to not be clandestine member of several groups. And I think this is happening in many countries, and it's actually a major integrity issue. And it's important to address this, because if not done properly, it's a real mess. And an integrity risk that has led to stricter rules as we now get from the EU.
Exactly. That's it for the questions for now. I saw somebody raising a hand. We are not taking hands yet. We shall take hands in the specific Q&A section at the end. So, Florentin, you may proceed.
Okay, perfect. So I said a lot of producer groups need to adapt, and for a long time we weren't entirely sure how many, but according to the impact study we just finished in December, my estimate is that it's around 70% of all currently certified organic producer groups worldwide in all those third countries that are not recognized, so without India specifically, which has thousands of producer groups. So around 70% cannot be certified as they are and must adapt their organizational structure or certification setup in order to continue group certification this year. So that's a major challenge for hundreds of producer supply chains at the same time. So who needs to change? It's all groups that are organized and certified on behalf of a processor or exporter. So that's in horticulture and a lot of production in Africa in particular. Worldwide, it's around 50% of all producer organizations. And it's also all producer groups without ICS or under a sort of 100 control system, which are common in many Mediterranean third countries. For example, in Morocco, but specifically also in Turkey, where it's all under this type of control system. So they all need to change, and the adaptations are often very complex, challenging, and with unknown economic effects yet. And although only 70% need to change their structure, just to point out, 100% need to change to the new ICS and production rules and meet all other requirements of the regulation anyway. So all are affected, but 70% also need to change their structure, which is a particularly challenging adaptation we find. So for the processor exporter organized groups, as we said already last time, they cannot be certified as they are. They need to work in the future with a separate group composed of farmers that can be certified as a group of operators, and in most cases the processor trader will be certified as an operator for preparation and export. And there is no universal solution. Every company needs to check their supply chains. They may have already existing legal entities that could be used, or new group entities will need to set up. And this is all, the time is ticking. Yes, it has ticked away. We are already in compliance now since 1st of January 2025. So theoretically, everybody should be already compliant. I hope you are. And yes. So I'll now share some more examples of companies who have started early to do the adaptation. This is one example in Sri Lanka. It's a coconut company with it had so far 1,000 organic farmers under one certificate for EU and NOP, the American Organic Program. Out of those, because the company is mainly focused on the US market and the EU rules were considered very tedious, the company has now split the certification. So they have only selected 100 eligible farmers for future or for EU certification in a new group of operator entity. They have created a so-called guarantee company as the group of operator entities for those selected EU farmers, which is a local form of non-profit company in which farmers can be members. There is very close contractual constitutional links between the new unit and the company, including some staff in both entities. And the coconut mill will provide the ICS services, but the services will be charged to the new entity and basically deducted from the price paid for the coconuts. And the mill will buy the products from the new entity. So they have managed the adaptation, everything is in place. But for example, it shows that it could be worth to split in future between the EU scope of certification and the NOP scope of certification to keep things simple. Another example, West Africa, dried fruits and nut exporter. So far, this company had 4,000 farmers under one certificate of the company, plus was buying from 2 more cooperatives, but they had already been certified individually before, so that wasn't affected. So for these 4,000 farmers under the company certificate, a solution had to be found. So this year, these 4,000 farmers will be certified in 6 cooperatives that will be the future group of operators. 2 were already existing, and already in this past year, for the first time, they were individually certified. 2 were created by the company or initiated by the company. And for one group of scattered farms who didn't want to be members in either of these cooperatives, it's not yet clear what a solution can be found. So that's the reality of reorganization. I think it shows very nicely. The organic certificates of these cooperatives will be owned by the cooperatives themselves, but the cost will be paid by the trader. The charge to the cooperatives as part of the sales contract. The trader will continue to administer the ICS, so it means the cooperatives appoint the ICS manager and the ICS inspector that are employed by the trader. Each cooperative will have its own ICS manual, but they're very similar because they're sort of all following the same logic, and there is very close and complex commercial agreements between the traders, the cooperatives, and other involved units, in this case, drying units for the fruit drying. And very close supervision by the company at all stages to make sure the product integrity and traceability is really strictly enforced. The trader is also very keen to still have close contact to the producers themselves and is aiming to achieve this through farmer training courses, extra premium payments that are done directly to the farmers, and special projects. So this is one of the other challenges in the adaptations, that many traders are actually deeply engaged in their supply chains and don't want to give up that connection and direct link to the farmers. And in this particular case, this is a solution they have found for this. The expected external certification cost increase is factor 2 to 2.5. So certification will be at least double as expensive, maybe 2.5 times more expensive just from one year to the other because of compliance. Another example of a very, very large coffee union in East Africa with more than 70,000 farmers, which so far have been certified under 3 certificates, and the ICS and certification all done by the coffee union, with the primary cooperatives only having an ICS coordinator, which is more like a technician. Most of these cooperatives have only organic members, so that wasn't a challenge. But as you can see, with 70,000 farmers, the problem is the scale, but also that it's a union which is composed of cooperatives, not the farmers themselves. So in this case, there was a lot of support given and projects initiated also by the buyer in Europe to support the adaptations. And originally, it was planned that all organic primary cooperatives would become certified as group of operators. 2 had to split to be under 2,000 members, but otherwise it seemed an easy change, right? To move the certification from union level down to primary cooperative level, with the union still to provide technical support and assistance and be certified for export still. But the main real challenges was to strengthen the ICS in all these primary organizations and to find ICS managers for all these different cooperatives and the whole bureaucracy, even for employment of the new ICS managers. But the biggest challenge in the end was now that the cost of certification have gone up by almost factor 5 or 4 to 5, I'm not entirely sure. So in the end, when the final quote came this autumn for the costs of certification this year, the union eventually now decided that only 1/3 of the primary cooperatives will be certified for the EU market because they just couldn't swallow. They couldn't invest into these considerably higher costs for 2025 before knowing whether these extra costs would be met by the market. I assume, but don't really know, that the others will continue with NOP organic or some other organic certification. I don't know. This is very recent, right? Because the long-term plans had to change last minute when they finally got the budget for certification, which most groups only received very late in 2024. So this is the reality many are facing. In terms of farmers' cooperatives, I think we have dealt with this. They can be composed only of farmers that are organic or in conversion, and all of the members must be under the size limit, and there is the group, the limit of 2,000 farmers. I think I'm not going into this. Another adaptation example, because I think the examples are actually more helpful to illustrate the rules in a way, because it shows both the challenges but also the solutions out there. So we have a Thai cooperative who also started very early because they also were supported in a special project in the adaptation. 600 farmers in the whole country in different clusters producing coconut rice and cashew. They also had some non-organic farmers. So what did they do? 5 farms were really too large and were not prepared to split, but they were founding members of the cooperatives and really important. So there an agreement was found again that these farms are individually certified and the cooperative pays 50% of the costs. Additionally, the cooperative set up a new community enterprise entity for just a small organic farmers as a group, national group of operators. So you see, the original cooperative can remain totally unchanged. They can have all their non-organic members, they can have the large farms as the members, because they did the trick of setting up a new legal entity just to meet the group of operator requirements. So that one seems to be quite a good adaptation example. It wasn't even that complicated for them, it seemed, to set up this community enterprise in Thailand that worked. And the cooperative will be certified as operator. So they'll be certified as an operator for preparation and exports and can remain the fair trade small producer organization. Everything is unchanged. And the expected cost increase is modest, just 10% higher. Though I have to check back with them whether it really is only 10% higher in reality now that they've gotten the quote for 2025. Some more examples: a large or a not so large coffee union, cocoa organization with 860 organic producers, main market EU. There they considered again 2 different options. The first, the union now preferred that all these 18 primary organizations, so the primary farmer cooperatives essentially, would be certified as individual group of operators. So there would be in total 18 group of operator certificates. The advantage of this is, of course, that it's the natural structure. The farmers feel that close affiliation with the primary cooperatives. No new legal entities are needed. It's existing, it's the natural structure. So it seemed a very nice solution at first. And at first they also thought they could deal with the higher costs. And it's good for risk mitigation because the smalls are very small. If one cooperative gets sanctioned and suspended, the others can still deliver the cocoa. So it seemed very nice. But in the end, the costs for having the certification for 18 different certificates for very small organizations turned out to be too much. And now they're considering a different approach, which is to set up 1, or in this case, actually 3 new legal group of operator entities for the organic farmers. And the farmers can remain members in their primary cooperatives, but also become member in that new group of operator unit, which will be a consortium. So just in the last couple of weeks, we had calls with lawyers and so on to find a legal form that can be done by union, and it can be done. It's just that the step is really difficult for producer unions, I found. Even though they have known for a long time that this might be a solution, it's something only few of them really contemplated, because it's such a disruption in their decade-old structures, and there is a lot of fears and concerns about the change in these farmer-led structures. Yeah, but of course this has considerably lower fees, but has additional complexity and requires complex subcontracting and isn't fully sorted yet. But it still seems, after a lot of turns and twists, they've realized actually it's the best solution for them moving forward. I think we'll go into subcontracting separately, but it's very important that with this restructuring, it can be very helpful that the currently certified trader or cooperatives, I call it X, continues to provide services, especially the ICS or the traceability system, because these new entities have neither the expertise nor the staff nor the finance to do it. So this is permitted by the regulation, and it is very important and helpful to use this option, because otherwise essentially the supply chain risks to fall apart completely and to not meet the new regulation either. So formally, the new group of operator entity can subcontract key processes to the farmers organization or the trader, the mother organization that is currently certified. This is specifically the ICS, but also the traceability system or the joint marketing system. I've added a few technical details here, what needs to be done and written in different documents for the type of subcontracting done. This will be included in the slide deck. I'm not going to explain it in detail, but essentially you have to work through the list, because there's a lot of references to different articles of the regulation, which should figure in your subcontracting agreements, essentially, if you go down that route. So there's 2 sections on that. Now, I'd like to, we first stop.
I think we have a few questions. Mm-hmm. So the first one, can a farmer be in 2 cooperatives, one organic and another non-organic?
Yes, no restriction of membership. Any farmer is free to be, can be member in multiple organizations, just not in multiple organic certificate groups for the same product.
Right. And the next one, if a trader stays close to the farmers, and for example, product payment or premium payment, should it go through the group of operators' bank account?
To my understanding, this is not regulated directly by the regulation, but it needs to be discussed very closely with the CB what they require as the minimum for the joint marketing system. Because what is clear is that the product has to be sold by all farmers together, by the group of operators to the next trader. But the actual payment, how the money changes ownership, say from the trader to the farmer, is a different question that is not regulated by the regulation, as long as on documentary account it's clear that it's joint sales by the group of operator to the trader. But in my understanding, this can be done, but quite often traders don't manage to get this through, because it's important for the farmer cooperative to have hold of that. So some traders, like in the example I have given, they chose that the product payment is done by the cooperative, but they really check that the money reaches the farmer and they require proof that the money has reached the farmer. Plus for the premium, which is paid at another time at the end of the year, they pay that directly. So they try different modes of working through this adaptation.
Great. If a cooperative is doing organic farming as part of their activities, will they also get certified as organic farmers? I think the question is around whether cooperative can be a legal personality, I think.
Yeah, but they cannot be certified as a farmer. They can be certified as an operator or as a group of operator, but if they have also non-organic members and activities, they cannot directly be certified as group of operators. Yeah. If the cooperative has one large farm, or the central processing of that cooperative could be certified as operator on its own account. But the cooperative would be rather classified as group of operators because, yeah, it's many farmers doing the actual agricultural production, not just the cooperative doesn't count as one farm.
Okay. So yeah, those are the questions I have for now.
Mm-hmm.
May I proceed?
Okay. So for the new production rules, someone from Thailand, I think the Fed Food Producer Network lady, was raising a question about crop rotation and the new crop diversity rules, and that this is very challenging. And since this is a question, I think in a lot of countries now that the rules are being implemented, I thought it's nice to take it up again and discuss it a bit further. So as I've shown, the new requirement is that for annual crops, there shall be multi-annual crop rotation, including mandatory leguminous crops as the main or cover crop and other green manure crops. So this is the original text from the regulation, actually. In case of perennial crops, including greenhouses, these requirements can be met by plant diversity and use of short-term green manure and legumes. Now, this is challenging, but just to point out, this is being implemented and required also in Europe. And for example, I was a bit astonished, say, that even in German greenhouses, there is now very specific, as a most extreme case where you wouldn't think, that within the organic greenhouses, they'll do rotation, right? But even there has been some agreement then between the authorities and the growers that green manure needs to be planted for at least, I think, 15 weeks per year. And they found different tricks that the leguminous crops are grown, for example, on the pathways within the greenhouses and so on. But just to point this out, this isn't a totally negotiable thing. It really is required, and European farmers, whether they like it or not, are also required to do it. So there is limited point in saying, oh, but this is expensive or tedious. It's in the main regulation, and hopefully is something that farmers will manage to adapt towards to. I would assume it's not the first thing that CBs will sanction now in 2025, as long as they see there is efforts going that way, but who knows what they're gonna sanction this year. Just to point this out, what's now written in the regulation is actually a core and very important principle of organic farming. And although my colleagues in the international department point out every single farmer in the world usually says, no, this can't be done. If they are convinced and start doing it, they see a lot of benefits and report better yields, better soil structure, more resilience towards droughts. It's important for plant protection and a lot of other reasons. But of course it can be and often is a sort of painful change. And there was the question about crop rotation in rice, for example, which I raised with my colleagues. And the answer was that it's always possible to sow a cover crop in the standing rice. And once it becomes too dry, the cover crop will continue to grow after the harvest of the rice. So that is one way it's done. It can be done in rice. And in Sri Lanka, there seems to be even a government initiative to grow mung bean between the rice crops in the 2 wet seasons, and it's been hugely successful. And some farmers actually even grow 2 bean crops in some years because it works well for them. So there is no restriction. The cash crop legumes are less beneficial for the soil, but they're actually allowed according to the regulations. So this is something to keep in mind, that sometimes the leguminous crop can be an interesting second cash crop for the farmers too, so which may increase their incentive to actually go for it. And in perennial crops, we often got the question, what about semi-arid climates where it's more challenging and, you know, water availability is a restriction for cover crops and green manure crops. And there my colleague pointed to Senegal and even the Sahel farmers who grow peanuts or canavalia under mango and cashew, for example, during the rainy season. And there is many under canopy crops in even more arid areas, which would be considered to count towards those aims of crop diversity and cover crops. And in, for example, Bio-Swiss olive and citrus groves, they always have a leguminous ground cover in the autumn and winter month for at least 4 months, which is sort of then considered as meeting these requirements. So it doesn't necessarily mean all year round. Of course, there is climatic conditions, but you can't just say, it's too tedious. It doesn't work at all in our climate, I guess is the point of it. And the required changes will be really a change of established practice. So my colleague told me that every time they explain a new good agricultural practice, they hear from the farmers, this is not possible at first. And then it takes demonstration plots. It takes sharing between farmers to convince them that it actually can be done. And then usually farmers are really happy with the changes in the long run. But what's clear is that some of these changes will create extra work and costs, and these are not yet reflected in organic prices. So hopefully prices for organic products will need to increase basically for some of these products to account for these higher costs of production to meet all these new rules. And this is for more than those rules now, but it will also be with regard to crop rotation and other new production rules. I also thought, since there seem to be quite a couple of participants who work with inputs or input industry in the audience, that I'd explain again the challenge with regard to authorized plant protection substances. And actually it's really complicated. But essentially, a lot of currently authorized plant extracts or microorganism-based substances may no longer be authorized under the new regulation as per current wording. One of the challenges is that really only the active substances authorized in the regulation may be used. Other local plant extracts which have been accepted under equivalence in the past will not be allowed. And if these plant extracts that are not listed shall be used in the future, there will be the need for submitting a dossier for consideration of the European Union to include those into Annex 6 for third country use. There is also currently a restriction in the regulation that any product used in organic agriculture shall comply with the conditions and the authorization for non-organic production set in the EU in another regulation. So essentially, any substance used in Uganda needs to be authorized also in Europe for European farming, like pesticide regulation. And this is a major challenge because some of the microorganisms used in third countries are different strains of microorganisms than those used in the European Commission, in the European Union. But the authorization within Europe is very specific. So it is per strain, not just by organism. And there has been some discussion and analysis of that problem and proposed amendments, and the regulation is currently under revision, and early drafts have shown that it's moving in the right direction. So hopefully for microorganisms at least, there will be a rule that they can be, as long as they are registered in the country of use, that can be acceptable, which would be a huge relief if this gets through. We don't know that yet. But in any case, it's clear that we have a problem with local plant extracts that are not yet listed. And there may be the need for dossiers of getting those approved. And it's important to note that this is just for plant protection purposes. So as used in pesticide products, in organic pesticide products. So it's not, there is no restriction to use these plants as soil amendments, as plant tonics. All of that is not restricted, but the restriction is for plant protection purposes. And just to show this, again, also as an example, how to read the regulation with a compliance mindset rather than equivalence mindset. For example, this, you see here the annex of 1165 list of authorized substances. Ethylene is permitted only on bananas and potatoes, could be used on citrus. Now, in the past, you would have thought ethylene is permitted, so surely it can't be a problem to use it in pineapple. No, the regulations, if it says now it's only permitted in banana and potatoes, this applies everywhere in the world. Now, in case of ethylene, COLIT has actually been also implemented to submit a dossier for inclusion, and it's already approved, pre-approved, but it's not, so it will eventually feature in that Annex 6 as a permitted authorized product. But just to point this out, this needed a dossier to have the same product that is already approved for bananas to be also be approved for pineapple, just to show what compliance means according to EU authorities. And the problem I mentioned is about plant extract. So we have neem, citronella, clove oil, rapeseed oil, spearmint oil, orange oil, tea tree, pyrethrum, and sulfur and pyrethrum listed as permitted plant extracts. Other plants are not permitted. That's what it means. And I think this is a completely different mindset than what we have been used to. I also thought we'll talk briefly about retroactive recognition of conversion again. As I said last week, the rules have become much stricter, and both operators need to request retroactive approval. The land may not have been treated for 3 years, so there's no point saying I stopped using pesticides 2 years ago, that then you can't have any retroactive recognition. There is detailed documentation and maps and geolocation and photos and so on needed for every plot of land is the regulatory text. And that CB will need to carry out risk analysis, take samples, and it says explicitly of each land parcel in line with risk analysis, and draw up an inspection report, and then write a final report and notify the accreditation body. It's unclear how this will work in a group, but it definitely will be much, much, much stricter than the current practices, especially in Africa. And we've heard comments from groups who had undergone this new process of retroactive recognition that they said the final costs were much more higher than for just having included these other farmers in their ICS and undergo 3 years conversion. It would have been much cheaper than all the fuss and work and extra cost of the retroactive recognition. So I'm just pointing this out to discuss this early with UCB, but maybe consider this. If you have new members, take them early into the group, because you have to expect that they have to undergo 3-year conversion. Same with new plots. Think a bit more long term, and it might be cheaper than the retroactive route under the new conditions, basically. That was this part. Is there any questions?
No, no questions.
Okay.
I think everything was super clear, so you may continue.
So for the controls, oh, there's a typo in my slide. Just pointing out where you find the new ICS rules to align to, because every single group you will need to revise your ICS manual and make sure you quote, you have used the right terms and cover all the points that are required in the regulation so that you can show and demonstrate your CB that you meet the new requirements. And there is, for this particular purpose, there is a published FIBL training manual, but there is also Naturland's documentation, which I shared the links for last time, available that can help you in this adaptation. I just wanted to remind you again to not forget to adapt your ICS. Although the new rules, they're not completely different than before, but it's still important that you work them through point by point, and they're actually quite clear to read and work through, I find. Compared to other rules, these are quite clear. I'd also again point out the ICS deficiencies that can lead to decertification of the whole group. So it's very important to strengthen the setup and the functioning of the ICS. So the new regulation in the Basic Act, so that's very important, high level for the CBs also to check. It includes a long list of ICS deficiency that can lead to decertification of the whole group. So not carrying out annual physical internal inspection of 100% of members, serious deviations between internal external findings, serious deficiencies in imposing appropriate measures in case you find non-conformities in the ICS, or processing selling products from suspended or withdrawn members, adding new members to the list without following due procedures, failing to indicate suspended members in the list you submit to your CB. So I'm just pointing this out as illustration because I think all of these shortcomings are not uncommon in my view. So just as a reminder, they are not directly in the regulation. So you really run into problem. Please take good care to be prepared for your compliance audit in 2025, as good as you can manage, but at least do your homework carefully for those things you can manage, like having your farmers list really thoroughly clean and up to date and these kind of topics. There is a list of high-risk third countries. And actually, I'm not going to go into detail here because you're mostly concerned in Africa, and there is not a single African country now on the high risk list for 2025, which is good news for Africa. This is more relevant for all countries that, like the Dominican Republic, suddenly has their bananas on the list, and of course, then this is a lot of direct effects and discussions. What does it mean and so on? But I'm not going to go into detail. If you're interested, you can read it in the presentation afterwards. And also just to say, there's rules on subcontracting in the regulation, but please check with your CB. But in most organic projects, and I think also in Africa, there's actually complex forms of subcontracting. Say, for fruit processing, there may be drying units, there'll be subcontracted processing in different forms. And under the new regulation, as with other aspects, there will be much more scrutiny and a clearer one system how this will be dealt with. And it's also much more clear now because it's a standard certificate. There is specific sections for different type of subcontracting, how they're listed. So it's much more, there is a need for much more transparency. So please check with your CB whether all your subcontracted activities are properly being controlled, either with you or with the company that you subcontract to your work to. So under the new regulation, there's still two options. So the subcontracted processor you work with is certified by a CB. So for example, there is a pineapple canning factory and 3 different cooperatives use it for subcontracting to process their pineapple while they own it for them. And then this subcontractor is certified by a control body, and then it's no problem. It's covered by a separate certificate. There's also the option that the operator remains responsible during subcontracting. That usually, in my understanding, means remains ownership during subcontracting. And then it can be controlled by the CB and listed on the operators or group of operators certificate. So it can still be listed on behalf of the company that subcontracts the process, but only if they remain responsible for the product during the subcontracted processing. So this shows then on the certificate as well. So you have in the certificate a section on what you do as subcontractor for other operators. Then it indicates if you subcontract activities to another entity, and then any subcontractors where you remain responsible for organic production and that are controlled on your behalf. So it's much more tidy and consistent now, and I assume this will mean some reshuffling of procedures if you have complex subcontracting in your project. So please check early with your CBs about this to not have any unexpected bad experiences during the audit. And just to point this out, if you face problems with residues and unauthorized substances and have faced maybe the topic of an official investigations because products are blocked while you find any residues in your product, I'd like to point you to a new guide, a Vademecum on official investigation, which is a very detailed and thick report, but it's really helpful because it explains common contaminants, the process of laboratory analysis, potential sources and pathways of contamination, and how this official investigation works. So this is very important. If this is a topic for you in your supply chain and you face these problems, I highly recommend this additional very technical resource to turn to. And also because we always get those questions, if it's something about maximum residue levels, that's not specific to organic, it's for all EU imports. So please check the AgroInfo website. There's a wealth of information, general and updates on specific products on AgroInfo website. Are there any questions?
No question. Doing very well. Can continue.
Okay, so in this last section now, I thought I'll share a few overall findings of a recent study we published on the impact of the EU regulation on smallholder value chains and the European organic sector. You can see the link here to the full study, which we published in late December. And also we just published 3 days ago the COLEAD case study on impacts of the EU organic regulation in the Dominican Republic, which is published jointly by COLEAD and FIBL, and which was very interesting, diving deeper into one specific country, and there specifically banana and cocoa production in the country. So I'll just share a few snapshots just to illustrate you the scale of the issue and that you're not alone with that adaptation process. So the first challenge is that for the study was that worldwide, we don't really know for sure how many producers are certified in producer groups with an internal control system and hence need to adapt to the new group of operator rules for the European market. But according to the estimates I made for the study, if you look at Latin America, we have almost 280,000 organic producers in the key smallholder countries. with a very high number of groups which tend to be smaller than, say, in Africa. And of all these groups, about 60% will need to adapt their organizational structure to become certified as group of operators in 2025. So you can see the scale of the challenge. With Africa, you have the highest number, apart from India, of organic producers in the key smallholder countries, and it's a much smaller number of groups because the groups tend to be much larger. And of those groups, around 70% need to be adapted to become certified as group of operators. For example, because there is more company-led supply chains, but also many of the large unions and cooperatives in coffee and cocoa, they have organic and non-organic farmers and don't readily meet the new requirements. And you also see the key commodities that are being certified as groups. Asia is a special case because India, you see it in gray, India is currently recognized by the EU as equivalent. So the production in India in groups doesn't change now in 2025 already to compliance with the 848. And India is the biggest organic producer with 2.3 million producers in more than 6,000 producer groups. So I listed it separately. They're not directly affected, but boy, do they have many producer groups in India. And the rest of Asia, again, I estimated around 70% of all groups there need to adapt. There's a lot of contract production by processors and traders, but also in some crops, even the farmers' cooperatives need to adjust in one way or the other. And just to look a bit closer at Africa with the most important countries, as I said, many large volume supply chains need to adapt. Many groups are too large, so more than 2,000 farmers. The farmers are very small, which makes sort of the cost issue also particularly challenging. Quite a lot of farmers associations have also non-organic members. This is particularly the case in coffee and cocoa, and many groups are organized by companies, especially in horticulture, nuts and oilseeds, but also in cocoa. And another challenge is that the ICS in Africa often tend to need considerable strengthening. Stricter rules for retroactive recognition are a key challenge, and even modest cost increases for organic certification can pose major challenges. And for many groups, compliance costs are expected to increase by 200%, which means double or triple the compliance costs, including the ICS costs. So the challenge is how can these higher costs be met? From all the examples we've seen, those groups that are organized by EU-owned, that are basically EU-owned or closely EU-associated trader organized groups, they have been working towards compliance for the last 2 or 3 years and are hopefully ready by now. But overall, from all we heard from CBs and so on, only relatively few other farmers association or companies have started the adaptation in earnest, or they have thought about it, but not yet taken all full steps to come into compliance, and everything is slowed down by heavy national administration and slow procedures. And coffee and cocoa in Africa is anyway already struggling with the implementation of the EU deforestation regulation, which is putting a further burden on the finances also of groups that have no more investment available for adaptation to the EU organic regulation after all these years. For the Dominican Republic, we now have one example of costs that might be interesting because it shows very concretely the effect of costs, and it's a relatively simple case even. It is a farmers association. It just had slightly more than 2,000 members. It had already a certificate in its own name, but works very closely with an exporter for certification and ICS. So they didn't have to change their structure, right? It was a rather easy adaptation process. So what did they do? in response to the new rules and to reduce their risk exposure, they excluded some farmers. So they now reduced the number of farms under organic certification to about 1,700 farmers, so reduction by 18%. And when you look at the costs per farmer, just the internal costs of being certified organic per farmer, so not the total amount, but just if you put it down per farmer, you can see that the costs between the old system of equivalence and what they're expected to do under compliance, they had to employ new staff, additional staff, and so on. They expect their own costs also for sampling and so on to be 50% higher per farmer. The external certification cost will also increase 50% for each farmer. So in total, the cost increases by 50%. If you take it per ton, it's equally an increase of about 50%. And in absolute terms, the cost increased by 25%. But it's quite important to look at the cost effects per farmer, or even more so per ton of product, because of course that affects your overall profitability as a group much more than just the absolute numbers. So we thought that was pretty interesting to look at a few costing examples, and I'll encourage you to also look at the cost changes per ton of volume that you can market as organic, so that you figure out really what is the best way forward for you. The opportunities we identified in the study was an increased integrity of organic products by setting consistent, harmonized rules and a level playing field. And actually, this was also appreciated by a lot of committed organic groups, because of course they also considered it unfair if others get a simpler deal than they do. So hopefully, at least in the medium run, if not this year, there'll be more harmonization of requirements and control, which will help to level the playing field and also benefit those companies that are truly committed to organic. Another benefit, potential opportunity, is that those producer groups that now will work hard to meet the new requirements may ultimately benefit from an improved market position in a less competitive race to the bottom. There will be more transparency on group certification, and the reorganization can help you to mitigate risks, because operating in smaller group units and having clearer rules can help producer groups to mitigate risks. But as you have certainly noticed, there is also considerable challenges in the adaptation, because many need to adapt. And for many, especially farmers associations, the required changes may be too daunting. Many I've seen, they're sort of stuck in the process. They know they need to do something, but they can't decide what exactly, and they can't really get started to really do it, because they feel like a rabbit in the spotlight of a car, basically. Many lack the means to invest in the changes. And for companies working with smallholders, the complications and commercial risk for operating organic supply chains will increase, because they have less control over the process, and it means a higher commercial risk for them. As a result, we expect that many organic small producer supply chains are likely to either drop, lose, or reduce their organic certification in the coming 2 years due to the combination of adaptations. It's not one effect only. It's also price pressure, it's higher costs for being certified, lower demand from Europe in some products, as well as the stricter newer rules. And we expect that those supply chains and farmers with low organic sales to Europe, or already a very low profitability of organic production, will be more likely to give up than those groups that are specialized only in organic and only in the European market. And many groups which we have seen consistently now all over is that even those groups who continue will reduce the number of EU certified producers and volume. So eventually this will be felt by the European market. And the question is, what would the European market do with this? because it seems clear that there will be reduced product availability and supply chain disruptions which will show only later now in 2025, 2026, because most producer groups will be audited now this year for the very first time ever under compliance. So we have to expect a large number of non-conformities, potentially critical ones, sudden disruptions, delays in the issue of certification all seem likely. And it's very clear that the costs for organic products that will eventually need to increase because of the higher costs for compliance and certification, the high risk of products losing their organic status, and temporary shortage of organic goods. But of course, the effects will vary completely and are impossible to predict at this time. Recommendations to support adaptation include, especially for traders in Europe and the European organic sector, providing information to suppliers, reaching out, providing a hand, consider the new challenges in your contracts and share risks. That's something we've seen increasingly. And also very important, accommodate the higher compliance costs in value chains. And now recently, I really heard from more traders that they felt or they realized they actually needed to invest heavily in their strategic suppliers because they realized they were all not getting ready. So they actually had to now reach out to them and even support certification costs for 1 year, so to ease the risk of going for these new rules in order to secure the product for them. So I think this is only beginning to happen, but more traders wake up to the fact that they may not get all the organic product they want unless they actually reach out more to their supply chain. And ultimately, I guess for producers, it is a question of the price they get and the security they have for doing the investments expected from them for the European market. And of course, there's also need for additional support and training programs, ideally including targeted financial support for smallholder producer groups for the initial adaptation, because it's a high risk, high investment cost at the beginning when the market prices haven't yet adjusted to the new costs of production, essentially. And also, many groups may need legal support to find suitable new legal setups and solutions. That's it. Am I on time? Sort of.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Thanks, Florentin. Before we open up to people raising hands and asking questions, I have some in the chat. So one is saying, and I will rephrase because I think it will be easier to respond. So if you have a cooperative that is both fair trade and organic, and ultimately the organic have to form a group of operators, but they remain members of the main cooperative. So meaning they have to sell their fair trade crop through the cooperative. Would that work, or they need to, the group of operators need a separate fair trade certification?
No, they don't. If the so for fair trade, say we have a cooperative that is organic and fair trade, and it has organic and non-organic members, all of which are fair trade certified, right? So we have a conventional fair trade certified part of the group and organic fair trade certified part of the group, which is a very common structure. The recommendation is that the current cooperative remains exactly as it is in terms of its membership. So it keeps all the non-organic farmers as members in the mother cooperative, and the mother cooperative continues to be fair trade certified. They need to tell FlowCert about it, but that's something that Fairtrade is now actively working on, accommodating and helping Fairtrade SBOs. But it's very important or beneficial that the cooperative remains in its current composition and membership. And then they need to set up a new legal entity for just the organic members. And then these organic farmers are members in the main mother cooperative, but also in the organic club, or whatever consortium, whatever self-help group, whatever legal form you can identify that works in your local context. So the farmers are officially member in the cooperative as before the organic ones, but also in this organic club for certification, and that's it. So this solution affects the fair trade certification the least, because the mother cooperative can still export organic and conventional from the different traders. Its composition is not changed. The only adaptation is the artificial new legal entity for the organic farmers, which is annoying, but as I showed, it's still probably the better solution than all other alternatives.
Great. I think the next one was for Marie-Hélène. That this training is an expert targeted training. Why don't you provide us with a certificate of participation?
Yeah, okay, thank you for the question. But normally when we give a certificate is that we test the knowledge of the people also. It's more for training that we give certificates, but not this kind of informative webinar. And sorry, but we have also trainings within the Coolit platform, and there you can attend online some training, and you have some tests, and then you get some certificates, but not in this case. Sorry for that.
And then one is one for Florentine. One association composed of, for example, 40 farmers which have less than 5 hectares. Can it be considered as one farmer? I mean, 40 farmers having a total land of less than 5 hectares. Can that be considered as one farm?
It's not entirely trivial. The normal type of farmer cooperative with single farmers that are all smaller, it can be considered as group of operators, but not as farmer. But if these farmers get together in a totally different form, say it's 5 farms, they're next to each other, they set up a farming company, they decide to use the same inputs, use the same staff, use the same management, and they operate as one farm, then they could become certified as one farm operator, but not 40 farmers that take individual decisions on their farms. That's not one farm, right? Because it's not under one management, neither ownership nor operation nor management. But it is interesting because in some countries we do see these new forms, like in Thailand and in Ecuador and DOMRAP. There is these efforts to check under under national law, what can be considered as one farm. And sometimes a group of farmers that operate as one can actually be considered a farm under national law, and the regulation definition of a farm actually allows producers, but it's all if it's under exactly the same management. So it's a bit of a gray area, but it's certainly a normal farmers association with farmers all over who take their own decisions how they produce, and their own farmers decision is not one farm. But there may be a case that a few farms get together specifically to become one farm, and there may be legal options to do that, and that could be an adaptation solution in some cases that we're seeing in some countries.
So thank you, Florentine. In the interest of time, of course, we promise to give some space for anybody who wants to go off mute and voice their questions. I think let's use this time to do that. Marie-Hélène, there is a question in the Q&A which you can answer direct from Lilian. Anybody wants to voice their question? This is a space. You can raise your hand, your virtual hand, and we shall unmute you so you can ask. We want to hear from you. We want to hear some few voices on the call.
I saw Samuel raised a hand, wasn't it?
To check if don't see any hands yet. Seems we've done a great job this time around. Nobody is asking.
It's all so easy by now, isn't it? Totally trivial, all of this. Easy peasy as cake.
Yes, we shall continue, and of course, giving this space because we truly want to hear some people who may want to voice there. So we are intentionally leaving the space for people to ask.
Can you see participants? So I can't. Yes.
Yeah, no hand so far,
No hand.
but yeah.
So Brian, what do you face as long as we wait? You've been doing trainings now for companies in Africa for the last 2 years. What are the main issues or challenges or good examples you've seen?
I think for the context, I mean, besides the case in Ethiopia that you highlighted, and I don't want to repeat that because I've been directly involved with that cooperative, coffee cooperative. In the past 2 trainings we've done, I think the tricky part has been because most of the ICSs have been company or managed. So the question of now the company being certified separately and organizing these farmers that have been literally under the cover of the company, how now they can stand on their own. I hear this question all the time from companies saying, but do you think it's practical? Do you think it's even possible, for these farmers to do things on their own? But I think what has been mostly refreshing to hear, this additional interpretation that actually the companies can still, mandate the ICS manager and still handhold, these groups of operators to get the certification. And I've had some companies moving that way, doing that. And I think so far, none is certified yet, but I think the direction of travel is good. The other challenge has been mainly around farmers that are scattered, in different areas and regions. How do you, of course, those small groups, they are below the 2,000 threshold, but, some are too small, to have their own, group of operators. So the question is, how do you combine those remotely located farmers into a meaningful group of operators that can have a functional ICS? That has been, so you find one company is having maybe located in the center in Kampala. I will give an example of Uganda, and then some farmers are in the east, others are in the west. And when you look at the numbers, they're even less than 100, in each of the subgroups. So obviously, if you can find a way of creating one ICS, it could still comply because there will still be less than 2,000. But practically, in terms of management of those groups, does it really make sense to have them under one group? Or is rather better to have 2 separate groups with a few farmers, but rather it would be maybe easier to manage for the ICS. So those are kind of the main challenges. And of course, the issue of cost. So the more subgroupings you create, the more cost is going to be for the company, because for sure it's the company to pay, and then eventually pass on the cost to the groups through sales. So those are the main issues I've had. And of course, if you've been one company having one ICS manager and now you have different groups, and you need to recruit new ICS managers, you need to train, so really the cost component is what I hear most, especially from the companies. Yeah, because most of the ICSs on this side, especially in horticulture, they are managed by companies. It's a little different for cooperatives, but for horticulture, it's mainly the companies. Some of which I've seen on the call, the ones I've worked with, but they've not said much. But yeah, those are the main ones I'm hearing. And as a result, I think we have some questions. or comments rather. Monica saying this is very informative. Thank you so much. They want, could you re-explain these terms? Group of farms, group of operators, and operator.
Okay. So group of operators is a very specific term that basically was invented by the new EU regulation. So I've been very careful to use the term only exactly as it is defined by the EU regulation. And so, as you have seen in the analysis, around 70% of currently certified producer groups, they are certified, they're organic, but they are not, they don't meet the definition of a group of operators. So that's why so far I've still used the term producer group as well as group of operators, because group of operators is only as it is defined by the EU regulation in this Article 36.1. But at the moment, we still have a very wide scale of different producer groups that are certified organic with totally different structures, setups, and so on. So that's why I've used the term producer group generically. Now, operator is the regulation, the EU regulation uses two terms, operator and group of operator. Operator is the classic form of organic certification that has been the only form of organic certification for the last 50 years in Europe, which is an operator is either a farm or a processor or an exporter, a single operator who is inspected every single year by the external control bodies. This is so far how the entire organic production in Europe is certified. Each farmer is an operator, so the farmer are certified as farm operators, are inspected every year by the organic control body. So far, the old EU regulation was written only for operators. And so this year now with the new regulation, for the first time, there is not only operators, there's also groups of operators, because the EU acknowledged that there are producer groups being certified and they wanted to still enable this form of group certification under the new regulation. So they defined it now within the regulation with the aim to still give smallholders access to the regulation. The only challenge is that the new definition, well, that 70% of all currently certified organic groups are not groups of operators as they are, is the challenge. But it was very good that it's defined. And so now the entire regulation text always mentions operators and groups of operators. It's the two forms of certification. There is nothing else. Either you're an operator or a group of operator, and that's your forms of certification. Does that?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. So another question from Ernestina. Please, could you enlighten me on the following? What exactly means that the cooperative has to market the product the individual farmers of the group are selling?
So this is a principle of group certification since the last 30 years, right? So the group certification and now also group of operator certification was created for joint sale through the group. It's a simplified form of organic certification for joint sales by the group. Classic example, a coffee cooperative where all the coffee the members produced is bought by the cooperatives and sold as a group. And this is what the simplified certification is for. Group certification does not mean individual certification of the member. So the cocoa farmer can't go off and sell his organic cocoa or the other organic products to whoever they please. If a farm wants to sell to multiple buyers and not only through the group and as organic, they need to be individually certified, as all organic farms in Europe are. And the advantage is if you're individually certified as an operator, a farm operator, you own the certificate, it's for your farm, and you can sell to whoever wants to buy from you. With group certification, it's a simplified form for joint marketing, organic marketing through the group. Or do you, maybe you want to extend on that? Maybe you understand the question better.
I think you've answered it well, but maybe Ernestina, you want to ask your second part of the question? I didn't understand it very, very well. We still have a few minutes. Ernestina, do you want to unmute? I don't know whether you're speaking or let me see. You need to unmute if you're speaking. We can't hear you yet.
But first, she has to raise her hand. Like this, I can give her the possibility to speak. But I don't see her in the list.
Oh, she says she can't unmute. Can you raise the hand? Can you click on the hand button so you can be given access?
Yeah, now you can unmute. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, okay, so the second part of the question, as it's clearly explained, is a group member, so definitely you have to sell through the group. But within the group, the farmer has sort of a multi-dynamic structure. So she has other products which the other farmers don't have. So she wants to sell that also as organic with a different brand. Like palm fruit from her farm as a different product. I don't know if I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, I've had your question. Florentin, you want to?
It's a bit complicated.
Yeah. So this is a common challenge for farmers in a group. So there is two options: either for the whole group, several farms at least are growing this product, and the group decides that for the benefit of the farmer, they clearly include these crops in the ICS, they collect yield estimates, they make sure that product is really also included on the organic certificate, because it's not automatic, right? If the ICS focuses only on cocoa, even if the farmer produces the palm as organic, it may not be equally checked in the ICS. So the group has to play a role usually for these other crops to include them and have them included in the certificate. And then again, they would need to market or facilitate the joint marketing through the group as organic. So that's option one, the most tidy one. Option two is if that farmer has significant production in this other crop, she could also become member in a second group of operator for her palm oil, for example. So maybe she is member in a shea group of operator, and she is member in a palm oil group of operator. And this is what I explained, that luckily the regulation would allow, if both ICS are up for checking this would be allowed. What can't be done is without she can't label the palm oil otherwise as organic. It's not certified organic if she just sells it to any local trader in the village. But of course, on the national market, maybe things are a bit more flexible, or there is a local supermarket, say, for the organic vegetable of that farmer, that they take this as a sufficient control mechanism that this farmer is an organic farmer certified for cocoa, and they accept that. But it's not legally, it's not fully covered, but it may still help for sales, right, as agroecological palm oil or something like that.
Okay, so maybe a follow-up on that.
Okay.
So as part of the certification process for the group, if she adds the palm as part of the products under the group,
yes, that is doable.
It means she still has to sell through the group.
Yes.
But not to sell separately and then the different label under the group.
She has to sell through the group, but the group also needs to be willing to do that, because the ICS needs to be adapted to include the Palm for at least those members who want to sell. But if it's a cooperative, I think, you know, if there is several farmers who want that, they can make it happen if it's a cooperative to facilitate these sales. But of course, it's the question whether there's enough volume to be worth the effort, because it will be a bit of extra effort, even if it's just minimal.
Great. We are time.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, as the conversation starts getting interesting, then we are time. So, Marie-Hélène, you want to close us out?
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you so much again, Florentine and Brian. It was really clear. And also, I think we learned more practical facts about the changes. I know that maybe some elements are still not clear for you. If you still have some question, you can raise them on our Agrinfo website. You have one tag called Ask Agrinfo, and you can still ask some question about the regulation on that tag, or you can contact colleagues with the email address, which is support@colleague.link. Then I'm really happy to see so many participants, and thank you so much to be there. And we'll still be there to support if any problem. Thank you so much to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.